Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. We're going to be taking a look at Brain Rules by John Medina. So much good stuff in here, and we're going to be focusing on what a new entrepreneur can learn from it.
Yeah, a lot of people might think, oh, the brain, like, what does that have to do with my business?
Right.
But actually, Medina's book is all about taking what we know about the brain and turning that into advice for how we can live and work better. And I think especially for entrepreneurs, there's some gold in here.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think to start off, maybe one of the most surprising things I took away from the book was just how important exercise is for our brains.
Right. I mean, I think a lot of us have heard that exercise is good for us.
Well,
But Medina really drives the point home, and he tells this really interesting story about Jack LaLanne.
who was that?
Oh, Jack LaLanne was this, like, legendary fitness guru, lived to be 96, right?
Wow.
And he was active, like, up until the very end.
Really? That's amazing.
Right. And Medina compares him to, like, Frank Lloyd Wright.
The architect.
Yeah, still designing buildings at 90. And then he contrasts both of them with someone who's, like, in their 80s in a nursing home, struggling with, cognitive decline.
Right.
And you're like, wow, these guys were sharp as a tack in their
Okay.
90s. What's the difference? And really, he highlights how much of a difference an active lifestyle makes.
Yeah, it really makes you think, right?
Yeah.
Like, how much of that was because of exercise, keeping their brain sharp,
Right.
And it's not just anecdotes that he's relying on. He
Yeah.
actually cites research that shows exercise can, like, cut your risk of dementia in half
Mm.
and Alzheimer's by 60%. Pretty wild.
Yeah, and it makes sense when you look at the science of it, right? When you exercise, you increase your blood flow.
Oh, right.
And that delivers more oxygen to your brain, more glucose, which is like the fuel for your brain.
Uh-huh.
And it also helps like flush out toxins and all that stuff that can build up. So it's almost like you're giving your brain a little detox. Plus, exercise can stimulate the growth of new brain cells,
New brain cells.
Yeah.
Wow.
especially in the hippocampus, which is like the memory center of your brain.
Oh, okay.
And that's something I think any entrepreneur
Needs a good memory.
absolutely needs a good memory, can always benefit from a thriving hippocampus.
So it really is like a brain power-up.
Exactly.
But, I think for a lot of entrepreneurs especially, the challenge is, like, where do you even find the time to exercise
Right.
when you're, working crazy hours trying to build a business?
Yeah. I mean, that's always the excuse, isn't it? I don't have the time.
Right.
But Medina, he has some, I think, really practical suggestions in the book. Like, have you ever done a walking meeting?
I haven't, no.
They're pretty fun, actually, especially if it's a nice day.
Yeah.
You just, take your laptop
Yeah.
or whatever it is and just walk and talk.
I like that.
Or maybe a treadmill desk is something that you might like.
I've seen those. Those are, like, a little intimidating.
I think they're fun. You're walking
Yeah.
while you're working.
Multitasking.
Exactly. Even just short breaks, just stand up every hour, move around a little bit.
Yeah.
Anything you can do to get that blood flowing is going to make a difference.
Okay, so exercise, we got that one down.
Hmm.
Now let's talk about another one that's also crucial, but also really hard when you're starting a business. Sleep.
Sleep. The entrepreneur's worst enemy.
Right. But, I think most people think of sleep as, like, downtime. Like the brain is just, shutting off and resting. But Medina actually says that's totally wrong.
Yeah, he describes the brain during sleep as being like this bustling city at night.
Busy.
Oh, yeah. It's busy processing information, consolidating all those memories that you've made during the day, kind of like prepping you for the next day ahead.
So it's not just resting, it's like working behind the scenes.
Exactly. And it's a lot of work. There's this constant tug of war going on between that part of your brain that wants to keep you awake, the circadian arousal system, versus the part of your brain that's trying to get you to sleep, the homeostatic sleep drive.
Oh, so that's what's going on when you get that, like, midday slump.
Yeah, exactly. The nap zone, as Medina calls it.
Oh, the nap zone. Love that.
And, a lot of people try to push through it.
Yeah, like another cup of coffee.
Yeah, exactly. But that can actually be really counterproductive.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Medina actually cites this study that NASA did where they found that giving pilots a 26-minute nap actually significantly improved their alertness
Yeah.
and their reaction time. I mean, if NASA's recommending naps, we should probably all be taking naps, right?
Right, definitely. So what happens then when we don't get enough sleep? I mean, I know I'm guilty of it, burning the midnight oil, trying to get things done.
Oh, we've all been there. But Medina doesn't sugarcoat it. He really lays out the consequences, and they're pretty scary. You get reduced cognitive function, your hormones get all messed up, your body's not able to use glucose as efficiently.
And our brains need glucose.
Exactly. And get this, it can even accelerate aging.
Oh, wow.
So skimping on sleep is basically like slowly sabotaging yourself.
No sleep, more wrinkles.
Pretty much. And he tells this really interesting story about Dmitry Mendeleev, the guy who created the periodic table of elements.
Oh, yeah.
Legend has it that he actually got the idea for the periodic table in a dream.
In a dream.
Yeah, he was struggling with it, went to sleep, woke up, and had it all figured out. Pretty inspiring, right?
That's wild. So I guess the takeaway here is prioritize sleep.
Absolutely. Don't underestimate the power of a well-rested brain. Figure out how much sleep you need.
Yeah.
Everybody's a little bit different. Maybe you're a 7-hour person. Maybe you're an 8-hour person. Experiment.
Yeah.
And if you need to, take those strategic naps, they can make a huge difference.
Okay, so exercise, sleep, check, check. Now let's talk about another big one for entrepreneurs. Stress.
Stress, yeah. I mean, it comes with the territory, right?
Right, yeah. But Medina, he starts this section off with his story about a dog in a cage. Kind of disturbing, but really powerful.
Yeah, he describes how the dog is being subjected to electric shocks, and it doesn't try to escape, even though it easily could.
That's so sad.
It is. It really illustrates this concept called learned helplessness, which is essentially what happens when we're exposed to chronic stress.
We just give up.
Yeah, we learn that we have no control over our situation, so we just stop trying, even when there might be a way out.
So that's what chronic stress does to us.
Yeah, it really can take a toll. And he explains, the science behind it. It's all about these hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, that get released when we're stressed.
Right.
And in small doses, they're actually helpful. They give us that energy and focus to deal with a threat, that fight or flight response.
Right.
But when stress is chronic, when it's constantly there, those same hormones start to cause damage.
Like it's that fight or flight mode all the time.
Exactly. And that takes a toll. Your body's not designed to be in that state 24/7.
So what kind of damage are we talking about here?
Medina explains that adrenaline, it can actually scar your blood vessels, increasing your risk of heart attack and stroke.
Wow.
Cortisol, which is that stress hormone, it can actually damage your hippocampus, that memory center we were talking about earlier. It's ironic because, a little stress might help you focus, but chronic stress can actually make it harder for you to learn and remember things.
Right. So what can we do about it? I mean, it's not like as an entrepreneur, you can just say, okay, I'm not going to be stressed anymore.
Right. Yeah, it's unavoidable, but we can definitely learn to manage it better. And Medina highlights a lot of the things that you probably already know, like meditation.
Oh, yeah.
Mindfulness. Exercise, actually, is a great stress reliever.
So even more reason to exercise. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. He also talks about creating a supportive work environment, a place where people feel comfortable communicating their struggles, where they're not afraid to ask for help when they need it.
Yeah, I think that's really important, having that sense of community and support, especially in the early days of a business.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, because you can't do it all alone, You need a team.
Okay, so we've got exercise, sleep, stress. Now let's move on to a concept that I think is really interesting for entrepreneurs. The idea that all of our brains are actually wired differently.
Yeah. Like, we know on the surface that people have different strengths and weaknesses, but Medina really takes that idea to a whole other level.
Right.
Like, he compares it to athletes specializing in different sports.
Okay.
A basketball player's brain is going to be wired differently than a swimmer's brain.
Makes sense.
Right. And it's the same with anything we do. All our experiences shape our brains and affect how we learn and process information.
So you're saying our brains aren't all identical when we're born?
Exactly. And it's not just like abstract differences.
Okay.
He actually talks about the physical structure of the brain changing based on our experiences.
Really?
Yeah. He gets into the nitty-gritty of neurons and synapses and all that good stuff. He describes a neuron as being like an uprooted tree.
Okay, I can picture that.
The cell body is the base, and then the dendrites are like branches taking in information.
Wonderful.
The axon is the trunk sending out information,
Uh-huh.
and then those axon terminals are like the roots connecting to other neurons.
So it's like a whole network of communication happening inside our brains.
Exactly. And every time you learn something new, you're actually strengthening those connections between neurons. Scientists call it synaptic plasticity.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's pretty mind-blowing, right?
So learning is literally like rewiring our brains.
Yeah, I love that way of putting it. And he tells this really crazy story about this thing called the Jennifer Aniston neuron.
What?
Yeah. Researchers they found this neuron in a patient's brain that fired only in response to pictures of Jennifer Aniston.
Seriously.
Isn't that wild? So that means essentially there's like a neuron for everything we experience.
That's fascinating, but also kind of scary.
I know.
Like Big Brother's watching.
Right. But the point is that our brains are incredibly specialized and individualized. Medina also talks about the work of George Ogeman. He was a neurosurgeon who mapped brain activity during surgery.
Oh, wow.
And he discovered that the way our brains are wired for language is actually really individual, really stable throughout life. So your childhood experiences really have a lasting impact on how you think and learn.
That's so interesting.
It is.
But how can entrepreneurs actually use this knowledge of how our brains are wired?
Well, it's all about understanding your strengths and weaknesses.
Oh,
What comes naturally to you, what do you struggle with? By understanding your own unique cognitive profile, you can actually play to your strengths and seek support where you need it. Maybe you're a visual learner. Maybe you learn best by listening. Maybe you need to move around while you're working.
It's like working smarter, not harder.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just individual work. Think about building a team, By understanding how different people's brains work, you can actually create a more diverse and effective team where everyone's strengths complement each other.
Okay, now let's talk about a brain rule that's crucial for any entrepreneur. Attention.
Attention. In this day and age, with so much information coming at us all the time, it's the most valuable resource.
Right.
And Medina starts off this section with a really important reminder, which is that the brain can only focus on one thing at a time.
Wait, so you're saying multitasking is a myth?
Yeah, pretty much. We might think we're good at it, but what we're really doing is just rapidly switching between tasks. And that makes us less efficient and more prone to making mistakes.
Okay, so if we can't multitask, how do we even get anything done?
It's not about not doing multiple things. It's about recognizing that your brain can only truly focus on one thing at a time. So when you're working on something important, try to eliminate distractions and really give it your full attention.
So it's all about prioritizing.
Right. Exactly. And when it comes to getting your message across, especially as an entrepreneur, emotions are your secret weapon.
Emotions.
Yeah. Think about it. Stories that really grab you, they evoke an emotional response.
Oh, okay.
Our brains are wired to pay attention to things that trigger emotions. It's like a survival mechanism.
So if I want to get people to remember my pitch, I need to make them feel something.
Exactly. Medina uses the example of the Apple 1984 commercial. Remember that one?
Yeah, the one with the woman throwing the hammer.
Yeah. It was brilliant because it tapped into those emotions of rebellion, individuality. It wasn't just information, it was an experience.
Yeah, I get it. But what about all the details? The facts and figures, don't those matter?
Of course they do, but Medina says the brain actually prioritizes meaning over detail.
What does that mean?
It means we remember the gist of things better than the specific facts.
That's good to know.
Right, so don't overload people with information. Focus on the big picture, the key takeaways. And organize information in a way that makes sense. Tell a story, use analogies.
So storytelling is more than just entertainment. It's actually a good way to get people to remember information.
Exactly.
Okay, I'll have to work on my storytelling skills then.
You and me both. Now, let's talk about a challenge that we all face in today's world, media multitasking.
Oh, yeah. Guilty as charged.
We're all guilty. But Medina presents some research that's pretty scary. Studies show that people who are heavy media multitaskers actually perform worse on attention tasks. Their brains are constantly switching between inputs, so they have a harder time filtering information and organizing memories.
So all that multitasking is actually making us less productive.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive, but it's true. So what can we do about it? Well, Medina suggests creating distraction-free zones.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do you do that when your phone's constantly buzzing and you have notifications popping up all the time?
It takes effort, but it's worth it. Turn off notifications, put your phone on silent, find a quiet place to work.
Yeah.
And, taking breaks can actually help too.
Breaks. But don't we want to be productive?
Yeah, but your brain needs time to rest and recharge. Stepping away from your work can actually help you focus better when you come back to it.
So it's about being intentional with our attention.
Exactly. Choose where you want to focus your energy. Don't let distractions dictate it for you.
Okay, so we've talked about attention. Now let's talk about something that's closely related. Memory. As entrepreneurs, we need to remember so much information.
Absolutely. And Medina, he kicks off this section with a comparison of Two really interesting cases. Kim Peek, who was a savant with an extraordinary memory, and HM, a patient who lost the ability to form new long-term memories after brain surgery.
So like two extremes.
Exactly. And it just shows how complex and multifaceted human memory is. But understanding how memory works can actually help us improve our ability to remember things.
So how does it work? It seems so mysterious sometimes.
Medina breaks it down into 4 stages: encoding, storage, retrieval, and forgetting.
Okay.
Encoding is basically transforming information into a format that our brain can store.
Right.
Storage is holding on to that information. Retrieval is accessing it when we need it. And forgetting, well, it's actually a helpful process that allows our brains to get rid of irrelevant information.
So even forgetting is important.
It is. And here's another interesting thing.
Yeah.
The brain doesn't actually store memories in one specific location. It's not like a file cabinet. Instead, memories are distributed throughout different regions of the cortex.
The pieces of a puzzle.
Exactly. And what that means is the more elaborately we encode information, the stronger that memory becomes.
So it's not just about reading something, it's about like really engaging with it.
Exactly. Passive learning is like creating a faint path in the woods. Active learning is like creating a well-worn trail. It's much easier to find your way back.
Okay, so how do we create those well-worn trails in our brains?
Repetition is key. But not just mindless repetition. Spacing out those repetitions over time is actually more effective than cramming.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And here's another tip. Try to reproduce the environment where you first learned something. It's called context-dependent memory.
What?
Yeah, if you learn something in a particular place, going back to that place can actually help you remember it better.
So maybe I should start holding all my meetings in the same coffee shop.
It's worth a try. Now let's talk about working memory.
Working memory. Isn't that just like short-term memory?
It's a little more complex than that. It's basically the mental workspace where you're holding information and manipulating it. It's essential for problem solving, decision making, following instructions.
Okay.
But it has a really limited capacity. So if you're not actively working with information, it disappears quickly.
It's like a tiny desk that gets cluttered very easily.
Perfect analogy. And that's where the hippocampus comes in. It's like the brain's librarian, sorting through information from working memory and deciding what to transfer to long-term storage.
So it's the gatekeeper to long-term memory.
Exactly. But this whole process, it takes time. Medina says it can take years for a memory to become fully consolidated.
Years. Wow.
So be patient with yourself.
It makes me feel better because I always feel like I have a terrible memory.
We all do sometimes. But Medina does have some good advice for improving our memory.
Like what?
Active recall techniques like flashcards or spaced repetition. Also connecting information to personal experiences or emotions.
Oh, right. And make it meaningful.
Exactly. And one of the best ways to really solidify your understanding is to teach what you've learned to someone else.
Become the teacher.
Exactly.
Okay, so now let's move on to a brain rule that I think is really fascinating. Multisensory learning.
Oh, I love this word.
We're constantly bombarded with sights and sounds and smells and all these sensory inputs. But how does our brain actually process all that information?
Medina uses the example of being in a busy nightclub. You know, music's pulsing, lights are flashing, people are talking. Our brains are constantly taking in all this sensory information and trying to make sense of it. It's like solving a giant multi-layered puzzle.
Yeah, it's amazing that our brains can do that.
It is. And the cool thing is, stimulating multiple senses actually enhances learning.
Really? So instead of just reading something, I should be trying to see it, hear it, smell it?
Exactly. The more senses you engage, the richer the learning experience becomes.
Okay, I can see how that would work, but can you give me some specific examples?
Sure. Imagine you're watching a video of someone speaking, but there's no sound.
Okay.
Studies show that your auditory cortex, the part of your brain that processes sound, is still activated, even though you can't actually hear anything.
Wait, what? So my brain is like filling in the blanks.
Exactly. It's using the visual cues to create an auditory experience. And it works the other way around, too. A burst of sound can actually make a flickering light visible, even if it's too faint to see normally.
Wow, so our senses are constantly interacting and influencing each other.
They are. And that's why multisensory learning is so powerful.
So it's not just a gimmick, it's actually based on how our brains work.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm definitely going to be trying to incorporate more senses into my learning from now on. But what about smell?
Smell is a powerful one. Medina talks about the connection between smell, emotion, and memory. It's called the Proust effect. Have you ever noticed how a particular smell can instantly transport you back to a specific time or place?
Oh, yeah, totally. Like fresh-baked cookies always remind me of my grandma's kitchen.
Exactly. And that's not just a personal anecdote. Research has actually shown that the scent of roses can improve the recall of information that was learned while sleeping.
Wait, so if I want to remember something for an important meeting, I should spray some rose perfume on my pillow.
Maybe. But the point is, scent has a powerful effect on our brains. And savvy marketers know this. That's why you often smell fresh-baked bread in real estate open houses or leather in luxury car showrooms.
They're trying to manipulate us with smells.
Exactly. They're creating an emotional connection that enhances the experience,
Sneaky.
but effective. Now, while smell is potent, Medina emphasizes that vision is actually the dominant sense for humans.
Really?
Yeah. It uses about half of the brain's processing power, which makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. We are relied on vision to survive, to spot predators, to find food.
So we're visual creatures.
We are, and that's why it's so important to use visuals when we're trying to communicate information.
Okay.
Pictures are more memorable than text. It's called the pictorial superiority effect. And that's true even from a very young age. Babies are super attuned to visual cues.
So when I'm creating marketing materials or presentations, I should use more images and videos.
Absolutely. Don't just tell people, show them.
Okay, now let's talk about another powerful tool that we can use to enhance our brains and our businesses. Music. Medina starts this section with a story about a nursing home resident with dementia who comes alive when he listens to music on an iPod.
It's such a moving story. It really highlights how music can tap into those deep emotional centers in the brain and reconnect people with their memories and their identities, even when other cognitive functions are declining.
It's a reminder that music is so much more than just entertainment.
It really is. And Medina, he doesn't just rely on anecdotes. He cites research showing that formal music training can actually improve cognitive skills in a variety of areas. Spatial reasoning, vocabulary, auditory processing, even working memory.
Really?
Yeah, it's like a workout for your brain.
I wish I had stuck with those piano lessons when I was a kid.
It's never too late to start. And it's not just about cognitive skills, it's also about social cognition. Music training can actually improve emotional intelligence, empathy.
Wow.
Yeah, Medina tells this really heartwarming story about a music teacher who lost his job due to budget cuts, and it just reminds us how important it is to support music education, you know?
Yeah.
The arts are so vital.
So what can we do as entrepreneurs?
Well, first of all, support music education for kids, but also think about how you can incorporate music into your own work.
Okay.
You know, listen to music while you work. Find music that helps you focus or music that helps you relax.
I love that.
Experiment with different genres. See what works for you.
Okay, so now let's talk about a topic that's often misunderstood and misrepresented, the idea that male and female brains are different.
Yeah, this is a tricky one. And Medina, he starts this section with an anecdote about a study where the same job candidate was perceived as more competent when presented as a man.
Oh, wow, that's messed up.
It is, and it just shows how much unconscious bias is still out there. But Medina stresses that while male and female brains are more similar than different, there are some distinct characteristics.
So it's not about saying one gender is smarter than the other. It's about recognizing that our brains might be specialized for different things.
Exactly. For example, women tend to have a larger prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain involved in decision-making.
Oh.
Men tend to have a larger amygdala, which is involved in processing emotions.
Huh. That's interesting.
And there's also the X chromosome, which plays a key role in brain development. Women have 2 X chromosomes, while men have 1 X and 1 Y.
So that means women are genetically more complex.
Well, it means there's more genetic variability. The X chromosomes in women's cells are a mix of their mother's and father's genes. Men only inherit their X chromosome from their mother.
That's fascinating. So how does that play out in the real world?
Well, there's been some research on how men and women respond differently to stress.
Oh, okay.
Women tend to activate the left amygdala, which is associated with remembering emotional details. Men tend to activate the right amygdala, which is associated with focusing on the gist of the situation.
So women might remember exactly what was said during an argument, while men might just remember that there was an argument.
Exactly. And again, it's not about saying one way of processing is better than the other.
Right.
It's about understanding that these differences exist and they can affect how we communicate and interact.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how do we navigate these gender differences? Especially, as entrepreneurs, we're working with people of all genders.
Communication is key. And Medina highlights the work of Deborah Tannen, a linguist who has studied communication differences between men and women extensively.
Oh, yeah, she wrote, "You just don't understand," right?
That's right. Her research suggests that boys tend towards more direct communication, using language to establish hierarchy through competition. Girls, on the other hand, tend to prefer a more collaborative style, focusing on building relationships.
So it's like the difference between saying "do this" and saying "let's do this."
Exactly. And these differences can lead to miscommunication and conflict.
Like when a woman asks her husband if he wants to stop for a drink, and he says no, but really she wanted to stop, and he's annoyed that she wasn't direct.
Classic example.
Right.
So it's really all about understanding that men and women might approach communication from different perspectives, and that can help us avoid those unnecessary conflicts.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about exercise, sleep, stress, how our brains are wired differently. Now let's talk about, I think, one of the most important qualities for any entrepreneur, exploration.
Yes. Medina, he starts the section with this really cute anecdote about his son sticking his tongue out, which at first glance seems kind of random, but he uses it to illustrate the innate curiosity and the scientific mindset of babies.
Right.
They're like little scientists constantly testing their environment, gathering data, and learning from their experiences.
So we're all born explorers.
We are. And that drive to explore, it's hardwired into our brains. It's what allows us to learn and grow. And Medina stresses that this doesn't go away as we get older. Our brains actually retain the ability to change throughout life.
Really? So it's not like we reach a certain age and our brains are like set in stone.
Not at all. We can actually grow new neurons even as adults in the areas of the brain involved in learning.
So we can teach an old dog new tricks.
You got it. And he gives the example of these Nobel laureates who are still actively doing research well into their 70s.
Wow. That's inspiring. But I think as adults, we have so many responsibilities. We get caught up in our routines. It's easy to lose that sense of curiosity.
It is. But Medina challenges us to, reawaken that childlike wonder.
Right.
To
Wow.
reawaken that childlike wonder, He encourages us to ask why more often, to seek out new experiences, to embrace challenges, and to never stop learning.
Yeah, it's about shifting our mindset from I know enough to what else can I discover?
Exactly. And that shift is especially crucial for entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the world's constantly changing. Technology is always evolving, Consumer behavior, it's never the same. To thrive in that environment, you need to be adaptable.
Yeah, and comfortable with not knowing everything. I think that's a big thing for entrepreneurs. Being okay with uncertainty.
Absolutely. But how do you actually channel that drive to explore, to be curious, into action?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Right. It's one thing to be curious. It's another to, turn that curiosity into something tangible.
Right.
Well, Medina suggests that, we need to create systems and structures that support that kind of exploration. What if you set aside time for brainstorming?
Oh, yeah.
Or you encourage your team to share their wildest ideas? He even talks about creating a failure fund.
What's that?
It's basically a fund to support projects that are risky, but potentially groundbreaking.
Oh, so it's like taking the fear out of trying new things, knowing that it's okay to fail.
Yeah, exactly. It's shifting the culture from punishing mistakes to seeing them as learning opportunities.
Seeing failure as part of the process.
Exactly. And he goes a step further. He even suggests keeping a failure log.
The failure log.
Where you analyze what went wrong and then you extract insights from those failures so you can apply them to future endeavors.
So you turn your stumbles into stepping stones.
Exactly. Turn those lemons into lemonade, right?
Love it. Okay, so now let's zoom out a little bit from the individual level and think about how we can create learning environments, both in schools and in workplaces that foster this curiosity, this spirit of exploration.
Right. And this is where Medina's idea of a college of education that's modeled after a medical school comes in.
Okay.
Instead of just passively absorbing information from textbooks, students would be actively engaged in research and real-world application.
I like that. So it's more hands-on.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine students working in a community school applying the latest research on brain development to create innovative learning experiences.
So it's bridging the gap between theory and practice.
Exactly.
And I think that model could be applied to so many other fields too. Imagine a business school that runs a real company.
Yeah.
Or a law school that operates a legal clinic.
Right. It's about making learning active and engaging and relevant.
Yeah, it's about tapping into that innate drive to explore. So we've talked about, exercise, sleep, managing stress, understanding how our brains are wired differently, and cultivating that spirit of exploration. What's the overarching theme that connects all these brain rules?
I think it's recognizing that the human brain is a problem-solving machine.
Oh.
You
Wow.
know, we're not just vessels for storing facts. We're creative, we're adaptable, and we're wired to solve challenges.
And that's what's allowed us to thrive as a species.
Right. I mean, think about our ancestors.
Yeah.
They didn't have textbooks, they didn't have lectures. They had to figure things out through trial and error.
Mhm.
Observation, experimentation. Their survival depended on it. And that same problem-solving instinct, it's in all of us.
Yeah, but I think sometimes, we get so focused on like finding the right answer that we forget to ask the right questions.
That's so true.
We get so caught up in following the rules that we lose sight of the bigger picture.
It's like we get stuck in that rigid thinking.
Yeah.
And Medina, he reminds us that we need to embrace that messy process of problem solving. Be willing to experiment, to make mistakes, to learn from those mistakes.
And to never stop asking why.
Exactly. That's what drives innovation. And for entrepreneurs, that problem solving mindset, it's everything, because building a business is essentially just a series of problems to be solved.
Right.
You're constantly facing new challenges,
Yeah.
navigating obstacles, coming up with creative solutions. And it's the entrepreneurs who embrace that challenge, who see problems as opportunities, they're the ones who really thrive.
Okay, so how do we actually cultivate this problem-solving mindset? Like, how do we train our brains to be more, adaptable and resilient?
Well, that's where all these brain rules that we've been talking about come in.
Right.
Exercise, it helps us think more clearly.
Yeah.
Sleep allows our brains to make connections.
Yeah.
Managing stress keeps us focused.
Yeah.
Understanding how our brains are wired helps us play to our strengths. Cultivating curiosity, engaging all of our senses, using music, recognizing those gender differences, all of this contributes to building a brain that is more adaptable, more creative, and more resilient.
It's not about mastering one single technique. It's about creating like this holistic approach to learning and working
Exactly.
that supports like the way our brains are naturally designed to function.
Yes, it's about creating a lifestyle that nourishes your mind and empowers you to become the best problem solver you can be. And that, for entrepreneurs, is the key to success. It's not just about having a great idea. It's about having the mental agility, the resilience to navigate all the challenges that come with building a business.
It's about being adaptable, creative, persistent.
Exactly. And never losing that spark of curiosity.
So as you continue on your journey, remember, your brain is your most valuable asset.
It is. Treat it well.
Challenge it,
Nourish it.
and it will reward you.
It will. And remember, you're not alone. There's a whole community of entrepreneurs out there, researchers, educators, who are all passionate about understanding the brain
Yeah.
and applying that knowledge to real-world problems.
So keep learning, keep experimenting, keep pushing the boundaries.
Exactly. Because when we unlock the power of our brains, we unlock the power to create, to innovate, and to really make a difference.
Now, as we move into the final part of this deep dive, I want to leave you with a question that Medina poses towards the end of his book.
Okay.
And it kind of builds on this idea of how our brains are wired for problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
Our brains evolved to thrive on the African savanna,
Right.
where survival depended on, being able to move, to interact socially, to explore, to problem solve in a dynamic, ever-changing environment.
Exactly. But the world we live in today is so different from that ancestral environment. We're more sedentary,
Yeah.
we're more isolated, we're more reliant on technology, and we're just bombarded with like a constant stream of information.
It's almost like we're living in a world that our brains weren't fully prepared for,
I think that's a great way to put it.
right? And so, like, this mismatch between our evolutionary heritage and our modern environment, it has some pretty profound implications for, how we learn, how we work, how we live.
Yeah. I mean, it explains why we're so prone to stress, right?
Right.
Why we struggle to focus, why we often feel overwhelmed by all the demands of modern life.
But we can't exactly go back to living on the savannah, can we?
Not really, no. But we can design our lives in ways that are more aligned with how our brains are naturally
Oh,
wired.
okay.
We can incorporate more movement into our day.
Right.
We can prioritize those social connections.
Yeah.
We can create opportunities for, exploration and downtime.
Yeah.
And we can actually structure our work environments in a way that supports focus and productivity.
So it's about like finding that balance.
Exactly. Honoring our evolutionary heritage, but also adapting to the demands of the modern world.
And for entrepreneurs, I think
Mm.
that's especially important,
Right.
right?
It is, because you're not just building a business, you're building a life.
Right.
And to create a life that's successful and fulfilling, you need to design it in a way that supports your brain.
So as you move forward on your journey, keep these ideas in mind.
Move your body, get enough sleep, manage your stress, embrace your unique brain wiring, cultivate your curiosity, engage all your senses, find the power of music, recognize those gender biases, explore your world, and never stop learning.
Yeah. These brain rules, they're not just abstract concepts.
They're not.
They're actionable insights that can really change how you approach building your business.
And your life.
And remember, you're not alone in this.
Yeah.
There's a whole community of entrepreneurs out there, researchers, educators, who are all passionate about this stuff.
They are.
So keep learning, keep experimenting, keep pushing the boundaries.
Because when we unlock the power of our brains, we unlock the power to create, to innovate, and to make a positive impact.
Now, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into brain rules, I want to leave you with a question that kind of builds on this idea of how our brains are wired for problem solving.
Okay.
We've talked about how our brains are incredibly adaptable, right?
Mhm.
They're constantly changing based on our experiences.
Right.
So the question is, how can you consciously shape your brain to become an even more effective entrepreneur? What specific actions can you take based on these brain rules to really enhance those problem-solving skills, your creativity, your resilience?
That's a great question.
It is, isn't it?
And it's one that I think every entrepreneur should be asking themselves.
Yeah, it really is. It's not about like waiting for our brains to magically change. It's about taking action.
Exactly. We have the power to shape our own brains to become more of who we want to be.
And I think that's like the most exciting takeaway from this whole deep dive.
I agree. It's empowering.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into brain rules, I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. This was fun.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation. So many fascinating insights.
Yeah. Medina's book is it's packed with so much good stuff.
It is. And I think, for entrepreneurs, it's really valuable to understand how our brains work.
Absolutely.
Because it gives us that edge, right?
It does. It allows us to work smarter, not harder.
So, as you go forward building your business, keep these brain rules in mind.
Yeah, treat your brain well. Feed it with new experiences, challenge it, and it will reward you.
And don't forget, you're not alone in this.
Right. There's a whole community out there cheering you on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So keep learning, keep experimenting, and keep pushing those boundaries.
And never stop asking why.
Exactly. This has been your deep dive into brain rules for entrepreneurial success.
We hope you enjoyed it.
We hope you found it valuable, inspiring. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.